Bam. Say, this is Wilfred Reilly, and you're watching the Break It Down show. That's how we
This is
start.
Wilfred Reilly, and you're watching the Break It Down show. Good to be back on
All
the
right.
show.
Yeah, man, it's always good to have you on the show. There are so many interesting things to talk about, but I guess I'll let you crack it off. And what is interesting to you right now?
Well, there's a lot going on right now. I mean, we just saw Trump restored to the ballot nationally by the Supreme Court, 9-0 decision. So that didn't really surprise me, but it is a positive. I mean, that's something that's obviously going on. I mean, and there are bigger national issues, immigration, crime, that kind of thing.
Right.
But right now, I mean, a lot of the stuff that as a political science prof I'd be asked to talk about is related to kind of the upcoming election, that sort of thing. So that's going on. What are your thoughts about big Trump being back on the ticket?
Honestly, I wish it wasn't the case. I wish both parties would get by each other and put their best people forward. Trump's clearly not the best of us. Too old, too purposefully problem causing, And I just don't know that he is the answer. He might feel good for some people, but certain things feel good. You shouldn't do them. And obviously Joe Biden I can't take that seriously. So I don't know. I'm just going to vote. Maybe I'll vote for you. Maybe I'll vote for me. Let's put a ticket together. You and I. We'll run and I always like the category of the slogan of just less shitty. We'll just be less shitty than the guys before us.
And a giant meteor 2024 and all that. I mean, yeah, like friends of mine from other countries have actually made fun of this, like Arabs and Indians, in the sense that, this is evidence democracy doesn't work. I mean, your country talks constantly about being the world's most democratic state. You've looked around the entire nation for the best possible candidates. You had DeSantis in the race, you had Haley in the race, Cornel West in the race, and you're ending up with Biden and Trump. I mean, so there's some reality to that. Like, one of those guys is going to be president. I mean, I would vote for Trump over Biden, I guess, but there always is the temptation to just write in Abraham Lincoln or something like that and avoid having to be involved with that decision at all in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And frankly, no vote is a vote. That's like a vote of no confidence, just like, hey, I can't, in good conscience. Here's the thing I've been saying a lot too, is when you pick the lesser of two evils, you're still picking evil. And that's assuming you're right. You pick the wrong evil and all of a sudden, it's worse. So we're not stacked with good options, but how much does it really matter, Will? Like, how much? I know the presidency has kind of grown in its power and, with executive orders and whatnot. Actually, if Pete was president on day one, I promise every day of this presidency, I will tear up executive orders. Congress had better get ready. Here we go. And I would deflate the power of the presidency, but I'm not going to be president. So does it matter that much day to day for most people?
Well, I mean, I think that's an important point. Not really. Who's president? The president plays kind of the role in the country that the cerebellum does in the body. So you have the entire body, which has these urges, desires, you have testosterone levels and all that. Then you have the brain, some of which is semi-conscious. And then you have the one sort of reasoning set of coordinates in the brain. And we like to imagine that your personality or whatever that is, not fears that you remember from childhood or the natural drives you have as a man or a woman or something like that, is what determines every choice you make in life. And when people actually look at that, like, we do have free will, but that's actually about 10% of the choices you make. There are choices you make in violent situations, for example, or playing sport, before you really even think about them. So your thoughts occur 30 or 40 seconds after something's already happened. So it's kind of the same set of almost illusions that we have about leadership. The idea is that if you have a good leader, there's a whole philosophy, the great man theory of history, then things are going to be dramatically different than if you have a bad leader. The problem with that in the U.S. context is what you call the deep state. So, I mean, the deep state is an actual thing. It's just when a new president comes into office, they appoint about 7,000 of the people in the government. They appoint senior ambassadors, Supreme Court justices, elite appellate court justices, the Secretary of Defense, the 20 people under him, all that. But everyone else is just hired through a bureaucratic hiring process. And there are about 8 million people, I believe, that work for the federal government. So below the, 8,000 guys, let's say, you have 8 million other guys that have something fairly respectable titles that have just been there as long as they've been there. It's almost impossible to fire these people. So this is something that Trump encountered. This is what he called the swamp. Like when he comes in and says, okay, I'm a real estate guy, I'm a business guy, I want things to function kind of quickly and rapidly, and I want to implement these 5 policies. There are these people that are almost laughing at him, like, oh, no, you can't do that. You have to go through a 4-year course of environmental review to build your wall. That was something that turned up during the wall thing. And that's been in place since the Ford administration. So who the president is matters less than most people think. But the one caveat I would add there is obviously the president, because he can write executive orders, because he can work with Congress, does have some pretty significant level of power. Right. So, I mean, like Biden with illegal immigration, the president is allowed to initiate the remain in a third foreign party policy. Trump called it remain in Mexico. Biden stopped that. That's entirely up to the president. The president can require people to enter at ports of entry. The president oversees the Department of Defense. I mean, it would be theoretically possible, I assume, for him to put soldiers on the border and coordinate with the Mexican army.
Sure.
The president oversees the Border Patrol, DHS. So for a lot of issues like immigration, the president actually is extremely powerful, and it's kind of up to him what he decides to do.
And they do get to pick. I mean, whether it's President Trump, President Biden, whoever, it's their policy. They get to say this is the direction we're going. We don't have to like it, but that is their job, right? Is to make those calls. The boss is the boss, and you get behind the boss's plan if you're in the government, or you get out of the government, one of the two. But that's just the nature of the thing. So you may not like it, but it's on you to do something about it at the ballot, right?
Yeah, well, the problem with the deep state is that no one ever gets out of the government, really. I mean, so what happens is if you don't like the president's policies, you subtly try to derail them from like your assistant undersecretary job. Like you say, it's not possible to do that. There's some astonishing examples of that have come out of both the Trump administration and out of the really elderly era of Mr. Biden, where the president will say something like, I want our soldiers gone from such and such a country. And the military will just say, okay, we're moving them entirely out of the battle zone. Like there'll be some technical use of words. And the troops will, in fact, remain within 100 miles of where they originally were. This happened to Trump and I think Yemen. And I remember listening to this on Pod Save America. And it was just like, first of all, I didn't know we had soldiers in Yemen. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff to the average, but I mean, like you probably did as a military guy, but to like the average educated American, a lot of this stuff is just completely unknown.
Oh, yeah.
So the question is, are you going to be enough of a policy expert to really go in there and winkle out what these people are doing to you? So Aaron says, it reminds me of a description of the British civil service as having been fighting a guerrilla war against politicians since the 1860s. Yeah, that's very correct. Like people tend to think when you're talking about DC at a high level, or even Chicago or New York, you tend to think of like there's a leadership class. Okay, the new mayor is in there, the new president, the new speaker of the House. Those are the people that are making policy. Certainly at the congressional level, the idea is Congress passes bills and those bills become law. I mean, there's a Schoolhouse Rock video about this, right, where the bill is sitting on the Capitol steps and it's waiting to become a piece of legislation. In reality, about 95% of law is passed by regulatory agencies, one step down from Congress and the president. Like, that's just a reality. Yeah. So the people in those regulatory agencies have an enormous amount of power. If Congress passes a border security bill, there's some guy, again, at like the deputy undersecretary level, that's what it would be passed down to, who decides how we're going to enforce that bill. Is there an environmental piece to it? Is there a work with Mexico piece to it? Can they just dismiss certain sections as unenforceable? Like none of that happens at the congressional level. And that's extremely important.
When you were talking about the military thing, one of the things Donald Trump did. So this is for people who don't know this. When you're in the military and you're in charge of people, where are your people all the time? Oh, I got one guy at the dentist. I got two guys in the motor pool. I got one guy doing French language training over at the language, where every person is. And so that's so even if you can't physically know where every person is, one or two ranks below you, pretty quick accounting. And it may not be like name like Dave is over here, but like we have 15 guys on leave. We have this and this. The president said, fall in, which is like account for all your people. Fall in to like all of the services. And the generals were like, we don't know. And that's a problem, man. Like you said, we got people in Yemen. How many? Well, and that's not, if you were a lieutenant, man, that'd be bad news for you to say that. Well, I don't know, and so somehow it gets stratified. And granted, look, it's a big machine. And so it's hard to do that. But when the boss says fall in, I want to know where everybody's at. Well, if you can't do that, then I have to question, You have too many things to do. Why don't you go do something else, old man, and move on? It's a problem. And so, and again, I'm going to get to the Yemen thing. You could ask people 3 years ago about Yemen and like the fight that's going on there, like, who cares about that? Wasn't important to anybody. Now we're glad to just throw rockets straight at those people, civilians and otherwise. We don't care. And, it's crazy how distracted we can be by a given country for a given amount of time and then literally not give even two shits about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, I don't want to go into like amoral ranting again, but I mean, I
Sure.
think that humans have a very limited capacity for care. I mean, there are actually studies that look at this, and I believe the total number of people you could really care about was like 20, like your family and closest buddies. And beyond that, there was a network of care for 150 people, your church, basically your village.
Yeah.
And beyond that, nobody cared. Like some people enjoyed hurting people outside those boundaries. And that was generally considered pretty normal in the high school football or, something like that. Other people more commonly enjoyed trading with them a little bit, but just didn't really give a shit. And I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. So, like today's more empathic, maybe a little more feminized perspective that we are the world, we are the children. No one, especially successful males, actually feels that way. So there's a weird contrast between being expected to say this bullshit and like what your actual goals are in life. So, I mean, I got into this debate recently on Twitter where I said, like, I don't want anyone to die, of course. But like in the climate change debate, it seems like there are a lot of people proposing that we give up very core rights that protect like our wives and children in order to help people in countries like Somalia who might be affected by climate change. And I'm just not interested in doing that at all. Like, I'm not interested in driving 3 days a week and the rest of the time riding a bicycle down dangerous roads because a 1 degree increase in temperature could kill so many enemies or other foreigners. Like, I have no interest whatsoever in doing that. And I suspect that the large majority of people, if you polled them anonymously, would not choose to do that. So you have this contrast between the pretense of constant caring and love and wonderment and the reality of how most people feel, which is, honorable, but very self-focused. You prioritize like your wife or your firstborn son or daughter over you. But like other than that, I mean, the other kids in order to. But I mean, like, whatever, like you love all of them. But like beyond your family and your immediate spouse, your best friend, you yourself are one of the 10 people you prioritize the most. And then outside you, there's a network of people that you care about less. So the Yemen thing, like, I don't really think anyone now is feeling passionate anger at Yemen. And I don't think anyone in the past felt deep concern for Yemen. I think the bigger issue is that the president had a very specific policy for that region and people were just sort of bullshitting him about it. And I assume that happens all the time, in all honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right about that. The ability to just simply say and be honest and say, I just don't care about that. It doesn't mean you're harmful or harsh. Just like I've got a care bandwidth and it's full. And like you said, with my 10 friends and my projects, some other thing, you know what? I'm not going to spend time to be educated enough on, and I'm just making this up, climate change to make a difference. So I'm going to work on what I work on. And the other things, for the most part, again, like who's president, this is actually Pete saying this, I actually don't care. It doesn't matter. I don't care who your congressperson is. I don't care who your senator, all these other people are like, oh my God, you can't believe who's in Congress. Doesn't matter to me. Not my representative. If I care, I'm going to engage with my representative, my senators, and get smaller on the government side. If I care, I barely care about that, man. And I try to be involved, but there's only so many things you can not care about if you're being honest.
Yeah, no, I think that's basically correct. And this is kind of an interesting topic that's away from the presidency. But yeah, most people do and probably should make rationally amoral decisions. Like when I decide something, my interest is what the thing is that's going to give me the greatest long and short-term quantum of total happiness. Nice. And that's usually quote unquote the good. Like it's much more fun to go on a pleasant date with someone that you're interested in than to stalk them from a distance. I'd imagine it's not a thing I've tried. But I mean, like the good generally is a way to make people like you. You're a pleasant ally. And it also makes you feel good. Like it's its own reward to do charity and so on. But it's important to realize that that's not always true. I mean, like there's a psychological question. Would you kill another adult fighting man for $50 million? And my answer has always been yes. Like I don't, it's stupid to say no. You could literally take $25 million and build a fucking orphanage. Like, the percentage of people who anonymously say yes to that is incredibly high. So it's very important to realize that morals are largely rules that were made up by humans. They were made up on the basis of our logical and our empathic sense. But they're only like 12 shared human moral universals. And they're things like don't rape kids, don't eat people, don't have sex with your mother. I mean, much beyond that, like attitudes toward consensual fighting, drug use, sexuality. The obvious reality is that they vary widely between civilized societies. Like, think about us, the Japanese, and the Arabs. So in that context, when you make 90% of decisions that you're actually going to make about business, about food, about romantic partners, your goal should be maximizing satisfaction for yourself within an honorable framework, because the good mostly works, but that really is your goal. So all of this sort of stuff about like you should do things that seem dishonorable that will hurt you because I want you to. I mean, my basic response is get that crap out of here. Like, I have no interest in doing it. Like, I'm going to stop being polite to you if you keep insisting on it. That's how I feel about a lot of immigration discourse, crime discourse, even the extremes of feminism and men's rights. Like, I don't think I have a duty to make myself have worse relationships because of some half-assed philosophy that you cooked up in a college dorm room, basically. So there actually are ways to regulate this, because most people do need a structuring system. But I mean, like, the classic center-right or libertarian framework is just the non-aggression principle. You can do what you want, but your right to swing your fist stops where my face begins. I'm going to hit you back. I find that very useful. I'm a non-aggression principle follower. Another one would be tithing, which is one step above, like outside your circle of care. You select 5% of your income and you give it to the best cause well outside that. And in practice, that's what Jane does. I mean, like, that's also quite honorable. A bunch of other things like this. There's reciprocity. You deal with people as they deal with you, not how they hypothetically should, but as they actually do. And by the way, I think Israel and Palestine would be better served to have a reciprocal framework. Like, if one side fires 10 rockets, the other side fires 11 rockets. Like, as opposed to these lengthy, bloody wars. Like, I even think that's how we should have responded to 9/11. Like, one of my friends half jokingly said we should have responded to that by blowing up the Kaaba, since most of the attackers are from Saudi Arabia. I personally think that would have started an unpleasant holy war that would have gone on for a long ass time. I also don't like the analogy to our holiest of holies being the World Trade Center. But I mean, like, something like that, like the King's Palace or whatever, it's dust now. You know, one city in Afghanistan, it's off the map, and then it's over, as opposed to a 20-year war. So there's a very defensible argument for reciprocity in human interactions. But just the claim you should do anything because it's arguably good and I want you to, that's a very weak claim. No one in practice can believe that. I think that's how I would think about that.
You know, that goes back to the climate thing, and this carrot versus stick, and like, fuck that carrot. We're going to use the stick every time we try to get you to behave and do something. Meanwhile, we import crude from Africa and Asia, put it on ships, burn bunker fuel in those ships to get it here. And by the time it gets here, like, oh, we made a bigger mess of the environment. We just offshored it to somewhere else. By the way, the people that pulling that oil out of the ground in Africa, they're not cared for by a place like OSHA and state rights and actual money. There's a commodity. And so we offshore all of this inhumanity, all of this pollution, and feel like we've done it. But all we've really done is not used our own personal resources to make ourselves a little more immune from international conflict. So says Pete.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, a lot of this stuff, a lot of morality is really, and I'm not, like, when I say I'm rationally amoral, it doesn't mean bad. It just means you have any one of the honorable frameworks humans developed over the past 10,000 years, all of which work better than woke nonsense now. But I mean, like Bushido, Stoicism, that type of thing. Even traditional muscular Christianity would fall in this vein, except for a few things Jesus said. Although I guess that's a big carve out for a Christian. But I mean, like, a lot of this stuff that people do because it makes them feel less guilty or it makes them feel good doesn't actually resolve structural problems. And I guess for me, when it comes to leadership, and we both had upper leadership roles, I'm almost totally a pragmatist. Like, my goal, if I'm a city councilman in Frankfurt or Lexington, there's a district of 50,000 people and I have these responsibilities, my goal would be to get shit done. Like, if I ever run for office here as opposed to the Chicago suburbs, my campaign platform would just be a list of all the roads I was going to pave and basketball hoops I was going to build and so on. We don't have a swimming pool. I'd throw in 10,000, get one built. Like, I mean, that's what it would be. And I think that's how I judge people. Like, what are you actually doing?
Right.
If your goal is environmental reform, so is mine. I pick up the trash. But the question is your policy of throwing paint on the Mona Lisa or something like that going to improve the environment? And even one step back, like there's a big argument on my Twitter page right now about EVs, these electric vehicles. There's an article that was just released that pointed out that EVs cause more environmental damage than gas cars for two reasons. One, what you use to power EVs is just the power that generates electricity in your state. So in Kentucky, that's raw anthracite coal. I mean, even in the best states, it's just nuclear power. Like there's no, God doesn't touch electrical power plants and charge them up every morning. You take trees or coal or whatever, and you push it into the entry beltway chute, and that's how you get power, right? I mean, like everyone knows this at a certain level. So to say, so that's reason one, like you're just moving the gas back one level. Like you're going from literally a gas car to a gas fueled power plant in many states. Or a petrol diesel fueled power plant would be more accurate. But I mean, the other thing with electric cars is that they're heavy as shit because they have these giant batteries that are made by slaves, and they have more actual metal body than a lot of gas cars now. Like my older Benz, which you've seen, it's like a plastic car, which like costs a goofy amount of money, but it's just like the bumper recently broke during an accident. So I took a bolt cutters and cut the bumper off, and I'm having my buddy put a new one on. Like half the bumper is now gone. This took maybe 15 minutes. And I was just amazed by how simple this was. Like any guy certainly could have done it. But I guess the point, though, is EVs are a lot heavier than that. And so there's also tire wear. So you get all this rubber particulate in the environment. So before you can say, well, I'm doing a good thing because I'm driving an electric vehicle, you have to look at how electric vehicles are powered and charged in your state, not in some theoretical heaven or Wakanda. Sure. And then two, like what's the other damage being done by your car? What's the impact of slavery, which is probably what built it? What's the impact of the batteries? Like, have we figured out how to recycle those lithium monsters yet? What's the impact of the tire wear and tear? So if you are a concerned environmentalist, a lot of people just want to buy a Tesla and look at the green leaf flickering on the view screen when you're driving and think, I'm improving the world. But if you actually want to make a difference, you'd have to calculate that out versus a good gas car like a BMW and then make your decision, and no one does. And we see this across a lot of fields.
That's so true. Like I've got a 2014 black truck. You've seen my truck. It is a very simple truck, not even a big, huge cab or nothing like that. But whatever car is bought today in the battery platform, my car will make less pollution because it runs simply. I don't drive a whole lot. And when I do, I don't race it around. When you put that heavy car on the road, now my truck's pretty heavy because it's a regular size truck. It's not full size in the modern sense, but it's a full size truck. There's all the things that happen. All of the products that come from petrochemicals, or what I like to call organic energy, all those 6,000 or so products, to include bitumen, which makes our roads. And if you don't have bitumen, there's not a good replacement for bitumen. Yes, you can make some other things, but you just end up back out on the road, burning up more energy, trying to recondition the road more frequently. So even if we get past the gas part of the car thing, we're not going to get past the thousands and thousands of products that are all around us, unavoidable. And so that's another part of this thing with that system is if we can use our own oil more efficiently, more safely, more profitably, more everything, then why are we creating a law that's called environmental when it just burns up more environment? I don't buy into that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's correct. Like there's not a lot to say about that. Like we frequently, one of the pieces of advice I would give young leaders, and I'm interested in whether you agree with this, but is you don't always have to do something. Like when you come into power, like if my experience would be in pretty high-end sales or in a number of things, coaching to some extent, teaching, business boss. But like when you come into a situation, if your department's running well, you don't have to do a lot of bullshit to show you're the boss now. You can just make some approving noises, look at the system and say like, yep, looks like you boys had this together. Yep, I'll be in the office. And everyone's actually going to approve of that. And they're going to say like, great, yeah, boss man recognized my contributions. And nothing happens and there's no hostility and there's no like push of horns. And it's the same thing here. Like all of this stuff is people trying to show that they are getting something done. They are present. So, okay, your society consumes a lot of oil. What's something it seems like you can do? Well, why don't you offshore that? Why don't you buy oil from other places? Well, how do you think they get the fucking oil? Like, I mean, magical birds don't fly, cans of it to, wherever their refinery is. It's the same type of drilling, but it's done in a location like Brazil, where there are far fewer safety limitations and so on down the line. Indonesia. So Saudi Arabia. I mean, one of the crazy things about this is a lot of these African and Muslim countries like Mauritania, which does a surprising amount of light to medium industry, still have slaves. So, I mean, it's absolutely, and when you say that, people always think like, oh, maybe not quite, maybe indentured servants. No, like a bunch of these countries still have slavery. It's only been off the legal books for 10 or 15 years. Like the people that are putting together your, lithium batteries, your glow in the dark watches, your iPhones, by the way, all that stuff are very likely not there willingly.
Right.
So all that has to be taken into account. Women can't drive in several of these countries. All that has to be taken into account when you're thinking about like, we're doing good now. Wouldn't it just like my energy policy would actually be just very simple. Like I would ignore the fanatics on the left and the extreme right. I would build as many nuclear power plants as possible. I mean, a nuke plant costs several $100 million, which is a lot,
right?
But then it runs for, ever. And I would also look at some of those things like the fracking gas that we were using 6 or 8 years ago that has now, this administration is not really engaging with it that much. And I would try to put as much power on the table as possible. You could argue that damages the planet, but I don't see that it does. I don't see that it damages the planet more than letting the Brazilian or Saudi extraction industries work at full peak, putting up more derricks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Aaron,
and then go ahead.
Sorry. One point, Aaron has a couple good points today. Like he says, if environmentalists want to reduce the environmental impact of cars, they should invest in improving trains. Yeah, that's correct. I mean, very often there's a simple solution to something that's working class, that's unromantic, that we've known about for 100 years. Like if you want people to drive less, have buses running regularly, right? Like New York does this. Chicago does a pretty good job of this, but only like 8 American cities do. Like in Frankfurt, we have 2 trolleys. This is the capital city of Kentucky. We have like 2 to 3 trolleys that run like once an hour. So everyone has to drive. If we had 18 of them, and you could go from Frankfurt to Lexington and Louisville, this is less than a 50-mile trip, by the way, you would see fewer people driving giant pickup trucks. So yes, of course, that would be more efficient than working with Brazil to outsource all of our oil jobs. Why doesn't anyone do it? Well, there's no money in your pocket from lobbyists. It doesn't sound cool. I really think it is that simple. It doesn't sound like an edgy, leaderly solution that you're making as the new head of the division, kind of.
Yeah. The one thing with trains, though, is it's somewhat obsolete. And when it's not subsidized, it struggles to stay relevant. Our train here, the Surfliner, you cannot take it from San Diego to Santa Barbara right now because there's landslides. Well, every time that happens, some subsystem has to go around that landslide. And then when you go to buy a ticket, a good chance it's sold out. You're like, what do you mean sold out? Well, can't you just like slap it on the cart? No, man, it's sold out. Well, then what am I doing? Like, if I can't rely on you, if I have to work my schedule around you, and all of a sudden, it's just it's too hard. But you're right, Chicago. I can get off the airplane in either airport, and I can be at my buddy's house. He's around the Loop area. I can be there within a reasonable amount of time. I don't bother with cabs or anything. I just take public transit as long as I feel safe. And if I'm some mom somewhere and there's a guy this is a literal Chicago story, everybody. A guy comes onto a bus with a fucking ninja sword and starts swinging it around. Guess who's never going to ride the bus again? We have to find these ways that work. And maybe it is electric cars that the city buys and they just back and forth on a route and it's fast as hell, but I don't know. I want to say this too. Here in California, we can't build trains. We suck at it. We want to, but we suck at it because everybody's got rights. As soon as something wants to happen, you get sued. And so like we have a train line proposed from not LA to Las Vegas. And look, it does get kind of crazy with traffic in Vegas, but people have to drive an hour away from LA up in Patterson area. And then they got to get on this train and they got to shoot across on a bullet train. Well, we'll wait and see if that ever happens because these projects are just impossible because there's so much lawfare in California. And it's weird, Will, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this politically. California clearly is left, right? But then we've cracked into these sub-left groups and they fight each other. So really we've ossified into this very conservative, progressive block of people who can't bear to let anybody else do anything progressive because then that would mean surrendering ground in their part of the world. So we're not talking like rednecks and rebel flags and that kind of stuff. We're just saying like these people are like, you cannot build this dam, you cannot have this
Yeah,
dam,
NIMBY
you
and
can,
NIMBY.
and like when you tear the dam down, it's all these different voices make it so that nothing ever happens, and then it gets exponentially more expensive.
Yeah. I mean, so we've got Barbara, it's too dangerous to ride Bart. I mean, so yeah, first of all, like, again, all of this stuff I think is pretty simple, but it all has to happen together. So, I mean, in terms of like the whole YIMBY, like, why don't we just build more housing? Build more housing to me is like the classic example of a mid-wit liberal slogan that doesn't mean anything by itself. Because if you build more housing on the south side of Chicago or in San Francisco's Mission and Tenderloin district or in a lot of these areas, most people, I mean, maybe other than wealthy drug dealers or something, most people aren't going to want to live in it because there's a really high level of crime. There's a really high level of homelessness. You don't want people like crapping on your doorstep or like having sex in your
Have you heard of
backyard.
Cabrini Green? I mean,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was actually in Chicago at the time when the people used to call them the Jets were torn down. And I mean, my buddies used to go to Cabrini. They had a basketball tournament, and it was one of the craziest places I've been. I mean, you had these so Cabrini Green in Chicago, one of the worst projects in the country, was right downtown. Like it was on the north side. The whole point is that you didn't want the people in the projects isolated. So you'd have these ghetto kids from the projects that would just like go walk down Michigan Avenue, and sometimes they'd just party, sometimes they'd rob people. I mean, the project itself, like you'd hoop there and there'd be grown men doing stuff, like sometimes cheering you on, sometimes like throwing crap out of the windows, like just the wildest stuff. And finally, the city realized, well, you can't stack poor people who drink, basically, and they took down the entire thing. But that's the same thing in San Francisco. I mean, like when you talk about like, I've been on the Red Line in Chicago, and I've experienced pretty much what you're saying when you said someone got on the train with a sword. Although that guy's probably some nerdy white theater kid who's just defending himself. Like he's probably not.
But it did happen.
But yeah, like I was on the train once when I was canvassing actually, and it was myself and a guy named, it was the guy who's a writer now, called himself Jared Emerson. But we were just sitting there and we were like bullshitting about girls or whatever. And this guy gets on the train with this full on aggressive pit bull. And it was a young black kid. And I was like, bro, what are you doing? And he was like, man, this is my motherfucking service dog. And he had like fake papers for the dog. And I was like, okay, bro. I mean, like that was just the stuff that was going on in Chicago. I remember someone else gave the dog a leg of chicken, like this like raver type girl with purple hair. The dog was like eating the chicken under the seat, like growling at people. And I mean, yeah, if you're providing that kind of ambiance to tourists from kind of the settled Midland suburbs, yeah, that's not going to work for you. So you need to not do that. But the basic idea of could you provide buses and put one cop on each bus? Yeah. Like it's not hard to solve most social problems. The barriers to solving social problems, especially on the left in these blue cities, tend to be people that want to complicate them would be one. Like, well, we can't really address black crime until we repair every last wound from slavery or something like that. So even if, half to 2/3 of the criminals are white and Hispanic, nothing gets done about any of them. Crime keeps increasing. That's issue one. Issue two is people that want like cool, edgy solutions. Like we don't need more buses. We need bullet trains. Like you mentioned, LA is trying to do this too. I mean, like I'd be cool with more buses. I don't need to travel to Milwaukee in an hour as often as I need to go to the store. So it's just there's all this stuff that interferes with the daily mundane work of actually getting things done. And a lot of good leadership is just the daily mundane work of actually getting things done. It's not like some big grandiose policy idea you have that won't work. Most positive change is incremental. I mean, that itself is one very important point.
Do we have the patience for incremental change? And how do you know when it's not going in the right direction? Like you can't convince someone who loves Oakland that Oakland is terrible. But I go to Oakland and Oakland's terrible. There's parts of Oakland where if you need help, it ain't coming. There's lots of parts that are beautiful, but there's parts where like just don't go there because you can't account for anything.
I think that's one of can't provide. That's one of the problems with incremental change, actually. I think like people get used to the way things are at a given time as incremental negative changes happen. And it's very hard to convince them that things have gotten worse. Like I see this with Chicagoans too, as we get back up to nearly 1,000 murders per year. I mean, people say things like it's a beautiful city. You walk downtown, better restaurants than Manhattan. Like, yeah, that's probably true. But I mean, like you don't want to walk downtown after 8 p.m. anymore, unless you're strapped up. I mean, so it's just it takes a while to convince people of that kind of thing. But in general, I think from a leadership level, yeah, like incremental change is good and it's measurable. if I were trying to stop crime in a city, I would do nothing that was targeted at like root causes. I think the root cause of crime actually is like human evil or something like that. I mean, like you can argue that the repression of blacks or even Irishmen and Italians contributed to higher crime rates or something. But the simple fact is like 90+% of people in those groups don't commit crime. So there's a specific predictor where like really unsympathetic people do things like commit rapes. How do you stop that? Well, you shoot rapists, or I mean, some rough equivalent to that. So I wouldn't spend any money on midnight basketball or, community centers doing exhibitions of Ghanaian art or anything like that. I'd put a bunch more cops on the street. I probably would bring back the police athletic league if you want to play ball. Just on and on, like practical things that would actually work. Give longer jail sentences. I'd build a new jail. Cook County Jail is a disgrace. That kind of stuff. And you would see crime drop because you had more people in jail for longer periods of time. I mean, that's it.
It's curious you say midnight basketball. Man, I think that kept me out of trouble, though. Like we had a guy who had keys to an old high school, great gym. We would go run all night. And you have like the tennis court style basketball courts where you push the button, bam, and then like the lights come on, and you try to make sure someone's always pushing that damn button. I mean, look, there's a little bit of a roughing about, and occasionally some guy's going to bring a gun somewhere. That never happened where I was at, but you had to be prepared to drop gloves and swing because some other guy was going to have a problem, or whatever it was. But that really the worst of it, And we did hours and hours and hours just playing basketball when we might otherwise, I don't know, get too bored and do things that are actually dumb.
Yeah, but I mean that's not really a state program. Like I used to do that too. Like I lived across the street when I moved to Aurora, which is right outside Chicago, from Lebanon Park, which is one of the better basketball courts in the suburbs. And like I was a better runner in high school, but like we all played hoops all the time. So we'd go down there and play. It was mostly like athletes from the different schools in the area, East Aurora, West Aurora, Muncie. I mean, so that was cool, but like that's just a park. I don't even know if that's technically considered a public park. You can jump, there's a fence in front of it, certainly. But I mean, so there's a difference between saying like, should schools be willing to give one of their athletes a key to the gym, and saying we need a state funded program to do X.
Sure.
Like I don't really think that having the state funded program is going to make much difference, because anyone that really wants to play basketball can just go to the gym. So that actually, the idea that there are different couple of different levels there. First of all, I don't really have a problem with midnight basketball, but I think that policing and that sort of thing would have a much bigger impact on crime. But secondarily, I think the idea that the government should take over a lot of private sector solutions, as someone who leans to the right, I think that's almost totally unnecessary. Like, I mean, sex ed in the schools or something like Moms for Liberty and so on are debating with the feminists right now. And I mean, to some extent, I've had young male mentees, by which I mean like college age, ask me like, what tips would you give me about girls? I give them some basic dating tips, but then just say, if you want a book on sex and dating, like just search that on Amazon. Like, I mean, there are hundreds of breakdowns. This is a clitoris, like there are hundreds of breakdowns of exactly what you should be doing. Ask your girlfriend. Like, that's a key point for the young man. Ask your girlfriend. Like, she'll tell you what feels good. Yeah. Do you really need an outside consulting agency to come into your school for 7 weeks and talk about eating pussy? Like, probably not. It's the same thing with midnight basketball. Like, all the gyms in the area, if you play sports, are usually open. Do you really need a program that brings together 800 gangbangers in one building to try to formalize that a little bit? I often don't think that stuff works at all, although I guess, we'll see. You could, again, with incremental changes, you can usually look at the data year by year. So like, did midnight basketball correlate with decreased rates of violence?
Yeah. And is there an argument to be made by having the some kind of, and you don't want too many adults around either, because that ruins the fun, because then someone's going to have a whistle. But is there something to be said about absolving a school or a city court of insurance problems because you have a representative of the state there to say, hey, knock it off, quit doing the dumb thing that you're doing, or whatever it is? Or is that just let the marketplace handle that, and people get sued when they do dumb things?
Yeah, let the marketplace handle that. I mean, like, unless someone actually gets shot, the fist fight case or something, I mean, the payout's going to be $10,000. I mean, actually, like, you could increase the number of agencies that could get sued theoretically if you have full-on midnight basketball that's sponsored by a company that's in a school and that has cops watching. I mean, the cops should be out on the streets arresting real criminals. But like in that situation, instead of 3 players, like the head coach who let you guys into the gym. You could sue the company, you could sue the police department, you could sue the school. And all you'd have to say is, instead of there was no one there, there was incompetence. Like the officer grabbed his weapon. What if someone shoots a young black kid? I mean, then it becomes like a national story for 15 years. So I don't know. I think that you can look at a lot of this stuff in a measurable fashion. Like I was talking about pornography recently online, and I'm not a huge porn fan, but it was just like people kept saying this crazy shit, like it drives men crazy, leads them to rape. And I actually just pulled up the rape numbers and was like, well, rape's going down substantially since the 80s. I mean, it seems actually more likely that it takes the craziest guys and redirects them into this stuff online. Like there's no evidence of what you're saying at all. And people got really mad about that. But it's the kind of thing you can check for almost anything. You know, another thing on the right is like minority pilots, like DEI is going to kill us all. Well, I mean, the question there is, are there a lot of minority pilots? And I looked, and the percentage of black pilots like 5%, Asian pilots like 3%. They're some of the best pilots, like they're all military veterans. So again, you can just look at the statistics on almost anything and see whether a claim is true or not, which is something I really couldn't emphasize too much. I mean, it's an obvious fact.
Yeah. Yeah. You were mentioning just in general, like giving advice to young men on dating and everything. And, you know, the old man in me is like, kids these days. But the reality is that people who want to date are going to go out and they're going to talk to someone that they like and they're going to ask them out. Maybe they don't go to movies like I did, but, you know, they do other things. It seems to me that sometimes we get wound up in things that don't necessarily need fixing. And then when it does, hey, some dude may come up to you and be like, hey, Will, how do I get better at talking to ladies? And you're like, why don't you buy your avatar, your ideal person's magazine that they read? And I'm saying magazines because I'm old, but you know, go read what they read and learn about it. You know, we can give this kind of advice, but what are your thoughts in general on? Because we do have the thing with the computer, we do have the thing with the isolation. Because like my world is the only world that matters, you know. And so, is there a problem with dating and people getting together and doing hookups and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not a prude, really. And there's nothing wrong with like the traditional.
Yeah, you said eating pussy earlier, so come on.
I mean, I don't know what else, cunnilingus or something. I mean, but like, and you know, you can cut anything that's profane, you know, but like and I really don't think like that's the term used among adults. I really don't think schools need to hire consulting companies to teach sixth graders how to go down on each other. That's really creepy. I would be, and again, there's nothing wrong providing digital materials, books that show people how to do that, but I would be really within reason. But I'd be really skeptical of like a male teacher who volunteered for that job. Like I wouldn't want to do it when you talk about legal threat. Like if I was teaching in the local high school and they're like, hey, you want to teach a sex ed class to an all-female group? No, not really. You know, I see a bunch of potential downsides to that. But so like hookup culture. First of all, I don't think hookups are necessarily a huge problem. You know, like I'm not an especially prudish person. I think the sexual revolution was good in most ways. Like there's a famous poll in Ms. Magazine in like 1973 where they asked a bunch of men, and these were like young men about town was the term, like lawyers and stockbrokers and stuff, if they really knew what a clitoris was and sort of what to do if they saw one. It was like 14% did. You know, for both men and women, oral sex was like an 8 times a year treat. Like this is all just documented. And I think the change there, like women can have checking accounts now. You can technically, it's not legal to rape your wife. Like the changes that came out of the sexual revolution were overwhelmingly positive. Like almost no one would trade their romantic life that they have with their partner for what the equivalent would have been in 1955. Like, and just a lot of things like hygiene, how often people wash, like how often people shave their bodies. It's true for men as well as women. No one's really trying to go back. It's like race relations. Like we screwed them up over the past 15 years, but nobody really wants to go back to 1953, where if you see a man from another ethnic group, you have to fight him. You know, black people live in their own side of town. So hookup culture itself, just the idea that people go to college parties and meet people they like, sleep with them, and about half the time end up dating. You know, I would encourage the women to wait a couple dates first, but I don't think that was one of the more catastrophic social problems. The issue that we're seeing now is actually something very different. So I wrote an article for National Review really breaking this down, and like rates of sex, including hookups, have dropped dramatically for young people. So, I mean, like between like 1983 and 2021, the percentage of high school senior men that had ever had sex fell from around 60% to 30%. The percent that were actually sexually active, like they had a normal, like we hook up after school girlfriend who liked them, that go on dates. It was dating and intimacy was the description. That fell from 40% to 21% at any given time. So it's not that the kids are having too much sex and that men aren't committing to women. That was like 2008, 2009. That was like when I was in college, grad school, I guess. Instead, it's that people are barely interacting at all because of the entire like online screen culture, where you have gaming, you have porn for the guys, for the women, like romantic erotica is available at Twitch, but also like there are these networks that are full of 90% of girls, like TikTok. So people are creating kind of these artificial bubbles, and they're seeing their friends about half as often as they used to. So when we talk about what just sounds like normal high school stuff, like, yeah, I would get in my car and I'd go to this gym in a sketchy neighborhood, and like all the white and black and whatever guys who were good at sports and all in the city would play each other. That to me is actually pretty healthy, although you have to, protect at the margins. But it's very, very difficult to think of the modern, like upper middle class kid doing that. So it's not so much like they're doing too much sketchy, dubiously legal stuff. It's that they're really restrained. They barely talk to the other sex and that kind of thing. I don't really know what to do about that. I mean, you've got to create an environment where people spend more time around each other. Yeah. I mean, you definitely, school makes that possible, but like practice after school, let the kids do some more freeform stuff. I mean, like youth clubs or something. I mean, you're seeing a lot of scenes develop now. Like, as much as I hate hipsters, that's a new scene that's not hippie or gang or goth or rave or whatever. But I mean, it's a tough problem. Like, people, in order to mate, in order to ask a girl on 3 dates, or hook up with her, consider marriage, are you going to the same college? In order to do any of that, you have to be around girls.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like,
I was going to say, then you think about the amount of dates and people you actually date before you pick your partner. And it is a frightfully small number, and we don't get into like actually learning, like, how do you figure what you like? How do you figure out what you're going to be? You're sort of just left to 2 or 3 dates, 10 dates. Does someone reliably go, is 20 dates the average? I would bet not.
Like in their life?
Yeah, like partners, different dating partners, like does someone go out?
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, the average person has had sex with 8 people and probably seriously dated about twice as many people, which sounds like kind of a lot. But when you think about that, especially for men who tend to go through drought periods, I mean, you're like 30. That's one person every 2 years, maybe one person a year during your adult portion of life, like 15 on, like a mature enough to date portion of life. So, I mean, yeah, like, I don't know if you actually need to know everything you're potentially into, though. Like, I'm a big fan of just like rough, practical solutions. Like, I think that the majority of men would find their partner fun to have sex with, and the majority of women would find their partner fun to date if it weren't for external influences, just because those things are naturally enjoyable. So, I mean, I think a lot of the discontent that we have now comes from the fact that there's all this other stuff. You can go online and watch a group of strangers have an orgy. There's all this, and like, I don't think porn is like a top 5 problem here. There's all this other stuff. Like, there's media, divorce island. Like, you can see couples of every kind interacting across every possible ethnic line, marriages ending at will, celebrity divorces. So there's more of a challenge to a normal marriage now. And to some extent, that's good. Like, when I was like, people now know what oral sex is. Guys are putting a little more effort into date night. Guys are shaving and washing. There's stuff like Squatch that are whole cleaning brands for men. Good. You dirty bastards. But I mean, like, it's, in addition to that, in addition to people rising to the challenge, there also are a lot of people that are just refusing to rise to the challenge. That's incels and femcells. And there also are a lot of perfectly normal marriages and long-term relationships that are getting destroyed. And that is a real problem. Like, people think the grass is greener on the other side. The average divorce takes place 3 years into a marriage, I believe. So it's an issue. You can minimize that in your own life by picking the person you're going to marry. But this explains a lot of what seems like atypical or bizarre data. Like, evangelical Christian women say they have the best sex lives. And if you unpack that, it seems really debatable. Like, they, get the least special favors, let's say, from their husbands. Their husbands aren't exactly the richest guys, the most suave guys. But I think the reason for that is that both the husband and the wife there have had maybe 2 sexual partners in their life. And they're going to lose all their friends.
Not a lot of experience. Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to lose
Yeah.
all their friends if they get divorced. I mean, they're part of a traditional Baptist or Catholic church. Divorce is a sin in Catholicism. So
Yeah.
you're not going to do those things. You're not going to experiment sexually, bring in a third person. You're not going to seek a way out of a marriage when one negative thing happens. And you're only comparing your wife to like one other person. You know, you probably watch porn or read magazines sometimes, but you only actually slept with one lady, and sex with women feels good. So you're not as distracted by modernity as a lot of people are, I think, which is at a certain level probably good, almost certainly good.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, that's a lot on sex. And you're right. There's a lot of things too. One of the factors that I believe is, from my perspective as a Gen X person, is that the younger generations, maybe not the third lowest, but the two younger ones, the millennials and the digital natives, they are so terrified of being offensive or being seen as being offensive. And we've just like, there's that barrier when it's like, hey, you get to say, hey, you look great. You know, you can pay someone a compliment without it having to be some kind of horrible thing. Now, look, you got to practice that. Maybe. Okay, great. But opening a door for somebody is never offensive. It's just a way to be nice. And yeah, you might get snapped at. You can take it. Just, these gentle things that you can do. You mentioned the other day on Twitter just about like shaving and putting a suit on. Take a girl out to the opera. Let her put on a fancy dress. All of these things go a long way. And these are simple actions. These aren't big, complicated things. These are Will Reilly and very simple solutions that, alleviate the problem.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Like, what prompted that? There was this picture of a guy who was wearing like a dirty t-shirt and who had this awkward, like it was a comb over, but there's hair growing in the middle of his head. And some feminist, who I'm actually casual friends with, if I recall correctly, said, I don't really care about the male loneliness crisis. This is the amount of effort guys are putting out. And I thought the male and the female responses to that were funny. It's guys and women dragging each other. Okay, it's amusing. But my suggestion was like, all this guy has to do is put on a Brooks Brothers suit and shave his head. And he's immediately like an 8. It was like some guy with a job. I Googled the picture, like ex-military dude. He's a guy. And it's a real guy, by the way, which is kind of sketchy that social media does this. Like, you'll take someone's picture from an argument thread and post it under a headline like, you'll never get laid, kill yourself. But I mean, like, so I think that my point there was pretty useful. And by the way, anyone can do this. Like, I mean, I look kind of silly right now, wearing a t-shirt that says Happy Treason Day. And I got some unflattering angles on the camera, just goofing around. But I mean, like, if I was going to go on a date, obviously you put on your jacket, your partner looks very nice, you have tickets to some cultural event. It's extremely easy to do this. And yeah, people should do that. There could be a financial argument, but it's also fun to, do 100 other things, go to a one nice lunch or window shop or something like that, go to the botanical gardens, just put some effort into it. And I mean, in all honesty, if you're incredibly broke, you probably shouldn't be dating. You should be working on getting a job and a house and someplace to take a woman. But, it's the basic for the majority of normal working and middle-class men. Attracting women is not very difficult. I want to say one last thing here. When you said there's this incredible fear of offense, I think that's one of the things that plays a big role. So one of the issues for men is the phone culture. Again, I don't think these are massive social problems, but the less time you spend gaming, watching porn, screwing around online, claiming that you're going to be a millionaire investing in crypto coins with names like Dog Shittium, like the more time you actually spend like making money, working out, hanging out with your buddies, learning skills like cooking. I mean, the more attractive you're probably going to be to the opposite sex, honestly, right off the bat. But the second thing I think is you can't be a huge punk about normal conversation. So, a feminist friend actually said this online, like guys are finding it very awkward to talk to women post Me Too. And her line was, again, like crude, like some of the jokes we've been making, but it's like, you're never going to be able to ask, like, are you down with anal, multiple dates in if you have trouble saying you look nice today.
Yeah.
I think that's a very blunt way of putting it, but it's probably true. Like, if you're horrified of being thought a rapist or some kind of abuser, like, are you going to ask out a pretty woman in your office? Are you going to be in normal situations like a church or a gym and be totally intimidated by the idea of approaching anyone, even where it's fairly normal? A bar is the ultimate example. I mean, and I think that the common I hear from a lot of young men is, and that's what's driven. And women, by the way, like 77% of women say that when they're in those situations, like the coffee bar at the gym, not lifting 150 pounds, or in a church, in a singles group, or in a club, they want guys to talk to them. Like, it's
Yes.
considered insulting that guys don't. Like, everyone
Yeah.
over like 30 knows this. So I think that would be a tip I would give the fellas as well. Like, understand where women expect contact and provide that. And be clean, shower after your own workout, that kind of thing. That's it. But because a lot of guys don't do that, it drives them into sort of app world,
Yeah.
which is actually really bad for most men. Like, when I was on dating apps, I realized something interesting as a numbers guy, which was that I was in kind of the bottom chunk of the 20% of men that would get responses, which is interesting. It's not really a compliment, not really an insult, but I would get about as many indicia of interest as I would put out. And some of my buddies were doing better, like Dr. Bro types. But I noticed like 70% of men were getting no responses at all. And what that indicates to me is, unless you're extremely good looking, or you have some indicia of intellectualism or wealth, and I honestly am, as manipulative as most successful people, so I threw a few in my different profiles, you're not going to get much contact from people because it's an artificial forum. It's focused on displays of beauty and wit, and women have a huge advantage in those categories over the average guy, like Craig, 41, software engineer from Boise. Like he needs to be at the church, he needs to be at the ski resort, he needs to be at places where people are.
Yeah, for sure. And you have to work on your game. You just have to. And your game doesn't have to be a game, but just, understanding what to say. Like I could say to you, hey, Will, you know what? Hey, look, bald head, that looks great, man. When did you decide to do that? And so I've just created a conversation, but I've put a compliment in there. Nobody hates a compliment. I mean, unless they're really just a nasty person. And then you just throw another compliment at them, and usually they kind of crack. But all of that stuff is part of the game. Smile when you talk to people. Boy, there's a game changer right there. Look like you're someone to be fun to hang out with. And by the way, cheap dates, Symphony, they're begging you to go. 90 minutes in and out. You can get tickets for two people for $40. You're not going to sit in great seats, but there's no bad seats in a Symphony. So go see the Symphony. There's not a woman that you want to date around that doesn't want to put on that one dress that she has that she never gets to go out in. Just that alone. Be like, hey, I got tickets to the Symphony. Yeah, if you want to go, I'd love to have you come with me. Super easy, non-threatening. Boom, done. Date. Yep. Off you go.
Yeah, and a lot of game is how to present things in a non-creepy but casually confident, mildly dominant, if you want to use that term, way. Like what you just said, like, hey, I've got the tickets. I've already got them. It's at 8:30. I'll pick you up. Yeah. I'd love it if you came with me. There's no pressure. There's no hard sell. By the way, as a guy, you should never coerce. Like if your partner's not into something sexually or doesn't want to go to a particular place, there's nothing lamer than a dude asking 25 times. Mention 2 to 3 times that you'd be interested in doing it so they know, and then shut the fuck up. Like it'll happen or it won't. He's a grown man. You shouldn't sit around bitching. So I mean that's and about 90% of the time it will. Like once you've gone on 8 dates, and the Bulls are playing again or whatever, you're probably going to end up doing that as opposed to the Symphony. But if someone's not too geeked out about something, it's not what you lead with. That's just an obvious point. The other thing with compliments, it's the same thing. Like one great piece of advice, and a lot of the game that I'm giving here, like I've actually heard from female friends. Like, I mean, women spit too and are often a little better at it, although, shyer at first. But I mean, a good idea is to talk to the opposite sex like they're human. So it sounds really obvious, but you don't just go up to people and say, hey, miss, you're looking good. I mean, like if someone had interesting tattoos, I'd actually ask about them. Like, why is there red hair on top of that stick of dynamite? For thinking of an ex-girlfriend's tattoo. And people almost always tell you sort of laughingly, and you'll talk about it. Would you like a drink? Yes or no? I mean, if it's no, then you go away, do your own thing. Like I actually, one of my advantages, and I mean, like now that I'm 40 and chubby and so on, I doubt I still have the same level of game. But one of my advantages was kind of that I didn't really care when I was in high school and college. Like I was pretty active in the Chicago rave scene, which is not a place where people have small amounts of sexual encounters. Like I genuinely liked women. There was usually someone I could date at a given time. So if I was talking to someone, it was mostly because I thought they were interesting. Obviously, like if I were single and they wanted to hook up, that would be fine. But very often I just actually have conversations with people. I'd sometimes bring books to bars if they were kind of lounges. Like if no one wanted to talk to me, I'd just sit there and read. And very often people would come up and talk to you. Like, I don't know, they thought you were like a lunatic alcoholic writer or something, but a lot of people are into that type.
Yeah. This is not for everybody, but if you've got any amount of money, if you walk in and you see a table full of attractive girls, you just send over a medium priced bottle of wine. We're not talking $100, but just like $35. Here's a bottle of wine. And okay, if that doesn't work, there 50, whatever it's going to be. And then you just don't do a thing about it. You just don't do a thing about it. You go, you have your meal at the bar or whatever. Maybe you leave your card with the bartender, and then you just walk out. And when they'll look and you're like, who you've instantly created a story about yourself. They're going to tell it, but it's not going to be a bad one because you've not done anything other than do something nice for them, and these kind of things. And not to be that, but there's all kinds of things like that where it can just be a gesture and it's in your community. And you just walk out and just plant that seed and see what happens. Next time you come in, the girl's going to be like, I saw you, you bought us wine. Bam. Now she's talking to you.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. Another way to do that is if you're at a table of guys and you're all like reasonable quality, just, you know, round up some funds, send a bottle over, and then just sit there bullshitting with each other and listening to the DJ or watching the game or whatever, and they will invariably come talk to you. Yeah, absolutely. So it's just a matter of how to interact with. I guess what I would say is it's just a matter of how to interact with people in a non-creepy way that indicates interest. Yeah, there's a Blink 182 line in a song called Game, and this is people are like, this is bullshit gonna be. But the line is like, I'm just playing with fire to break the ice. And it's kind of what it is. Like you're doing something mildly risky to get someone to want to engage with you. And one thing you have to be used to as a man is that women gatekeep sex and first dates, and then men gatekeep longer term relationships. And if you like a person, you don't want to be too obnoxious about any of this. Because if you end up together, neither one of you wants to have punished the other too much with Herculean labors early on. But I mean, so like you're not submissive, but you're the pursuer when it comes to trying to get the first couple of dates, trying to get someone into bed. And you don't want to pursue in a lame, pathetic fashion. You just want to be kind of aware of that. So girls are often going to say no. And that's fine. They just don't like you. Yeah, it's don't be a bitch about it. But you have to be prepared for, like, you could send over a $60 bottle of wine and a girl could come over and like pat you on the shoulder or kiss you on the cheek and then never talk to you again. And it's like, okay, swing and a miss. Yeah. Like you just have to be prepared for that. And I think that's one of the big issues with the younger guys. Like every time I've gone into incel forums, like for research, I'm not there to like complain, but that's what they all say. But like every time I've done that, I've noticed two things. One, all the incels seem to feel that they're owed like a porn star chef. Like none of them seem to think, like the way I put this on Twitter is none of them seem interested in like a 6 from their old neighborhood who's usually down for sex and oral and who expects you to pay for dates. Like the things that you would assume someone in that role is going to be searching for, like any pretty girl. I want to date someone. I'm thinking about marriage. That's not at all what the image being presented is. The second thing is that they seem terrified about normal initiation. So there are a lot of these threads where people ask something from, why don't you ask out a girl at your church, to why don't you frankly pay for a hooker? And guys will just say, no, I'd be too afraid. What could happen? Vice Squad's going to kick in the door. Like on and on and on with 15 or 20 men commenting. And it's sort of like, well, if you lack the bravery to talk to women are probably going to assume you lack the bravery to defend them and do a bunch of other things. So it's not very appealing, is it?
Yeah. The other thing, like a rule of thumb I developed a long time ago was anything that I would say or do, like to a I'd buy you a drink. Like, hey, Will, let me buy you a drink. And then you're going to be like, yeah, let's go. Let's have some, these things work universally. So when you see somebody, you're like, hey, let me buy you a drink. And you're just nice about it. And there's, again, no strings attached. You see what happens. It's your opening to say, hey, I just want to do something nice for you. Whether you know the person or not, these openings are, and this is a great opening thing. You say, if no one else tells you today, Will, I think you're a fantastic person. I see your work and I'm so amazed by you. I just want to let you know that because we don't hear that kind of stuff enough. And just spin in your heel and walk if it doesn't work, because no one can get mad at that. It's a legit compliment.
Yeah, if you do stuff like that, it's also a good idea to give the compliment and then leave. So the other person will kind of come talk to you. Like you don't want to walk a bottle of wine over to tables for multiple women and just stand there awkwardly. But
staring at them. Drinking yet?
I guess that's funny. Are you drunk? Who's this fucking guy? I guess one of my tips here would be that the more sincere this stuff is, the better. Like the things that are being said, like send over small gifts if you actually have money and you don't mind, and you're not going to be annoyed if someone rejects that.
Yeah.
In terms of compliments, I generally give women and men compliments that are real. So at
Right,
work,
of
I would
course.
obviously not say something like, you're fine. I would say something like, well, you're one of the best, junior VPs here. Good job. And then I would just like leave.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
chance of that person coming to talk to you or asking you to lunch or something are actually really high. And then you can see if you like each other. Like you can have female friends, you can have older male friends. Like you don't have to necessarily form one type of relationship with everyone that you're friendly with or an ally to. But yeah, I mean, do stylish gestures, be sincere. I think those are both pretty big points. And,
I've got
do
another
stuff.
one.
All right.
I've got another one. So when you're nice to people in general and you do things like that and there's no string attached, and you do it for a variety of people, you become someone that people want to introduce people to.
Yep.
And so they're like, oh, you know what? I know who's single. I met this guy that, and all of a sudden they had a conversation. He looked like a psychopath drunk guy reading a book in a bar by himself, but it turned out super nice guy. And then all of a sudden, boom, you've been set up.
Actually, the book in the bar thing worked pretty well. I mean, I think psychopathia is. I actually think for men it's a little different. Like if you're like, I mean, I'm kind of mildly spurgy. Like if you are just an interesting nerdy or jockey or whatever guy, there's no real reason to hide your quirks. Psychopathia or bizarreness, what people avoid, I think, is excessive pursuit combined with potential danger. And I don't really think that was ever an issue for any of my friends during this period. But yeah, I mean, so we're talking about some of the stuff, compliment people, do basic stuff like buy drinks. You always ask them, pick a time for the date, send gifts if you're interested. But I think another thing that you just mentioned, the way a lot of people actually met their partners in the past, I'm sure like your group of guys and mine all had good game. But another thing is just you have male and female friends and people ask you to do things or recommend that you date somebody and you kind of do. And I see this a lot in religious communities, actually. Where like if you're part of a church, there are all these groups designed to get people to link up without modern hookup culture, a lot of which work pretty well. So I mean, someone will just say like, "Hey, Pete, you're still, you broke up with Linda, you single? Okay, why don't you come over and hang out with my stepsister? We're making dinner in 2 days. Or why don't you take her to such and such an event, which could be inside of, or better yet, outside of kind of the faith community." So I think an issue for a lot of people is just lacking communities. If I were going to give young men advice, actually, it wouldn't be pursue women so much. I mean, of course you should if you're into that, if you've got money and so on. But I mean, like, it would just be more join communities. Join a gym, probably join a church if you're a religious man, join a dojo. That's always useful. I mean, like, just go to places where people are. Get into some shit like rock climbing. And you will find that there are a whole bunch of attractive people like hoofing up cliffs and Lululemon, and even if they're mostly married, like their little sisters aren't, so on down the line, and you're going to wind up almost certainly in a pretty normal relationship. That's why high school and college work, because you're in that school environment, and so is everyone else there. People know you're a normal citizen who's going to get first a degree, then a diploma. You're in the same age group as the people you're interested in. And so it's natural. There's a party scene, and it's natural that people kind of end up together. After that, after high school, fraternity days and all that, most people move into a smaller sector where you have you and your first wife's friends and you're on a sales floor with like 8 guys and that's it. You don't see a lot of people. So the question is, how do you go out and see more people, I think?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true, and yeah, you also get to pursue happiness a little bit. You're chasing things like I'm going to go join a bowling league. I don't know anybody. I guarantee you, the person that runs the bowling league's like, I need some singles. We'd love to get some new people in here. They're not going to turn you away. Like, what, let's find you a team, and then boom, all of a sudden you're on a team and you're meeting people. So all of those things. I'm saying bowling, whatever, whatever it's going to be, but participate. Yeah, but by the way, this thing. Not as good as grabbing a big ball and rolling it down the gutter. I mean, it's just way more engaging in real life.
Yeah, that's another thing, especially for guys. And again, I've actually had a pretty good game. But it's not like I'm some like relationship expert or something. But I mean,
right.
For guys, though, I think another thing is that the further you get away from the beauty contests, the better. Like most of my friends kind of look like medieval blacksmiths. I mean, they're like big, burly guys. A lot of them were in the military. A lot of them were in business and different weird fields. Like one of them worked for an oil rig company until recently. Beards, and I mean, like none of women find that reasonably attractive. But if you're just your picture on an app and you're like holding a fish or something, you're not really going to have a stream of people coming after you, bro. Like just be aware of that. That's going to get you 1 or 2 dates a year. So as a man, you have to hunt rather than gather. Like you have to go out there and talk to people and so on. And the point of this is that the things that make men attractive, like strength and the ability to defend you, I wouldn't say wealth, but like the ability to feed yourself financially and not be dependent on your woman and to help them. Wit, all of that is only evident in a personal conversation. Like when you're talking to someone on the internet, frankly, for some of the dates I've been on, you don't know that their picture is them.
Yeah.
I just have a regular, like, bald-headed ass picture of me doing this. But I mean, like, I have guys that are posing in like vehicles they owned 10 years ago in the group, or like back in the army, so like you don't really understand what you're getting, so you need to be around people in person, and you need to show that you can interact functionally with people in those one-on-one roles, and that's what's going to make most people attractive, especially the guys.
Hey, I don't want to keep you any longer. I've had you for a while already. Is there anything you want to wrap up on?
No, not really. I think we've talked about kind of the major points, and the game thing goes into a larger point, which is, I guess this is kind of my ending. There's a common sense, practical solution for most things. Like if you're not dating, it's obviously not because women are only interested in the top 5% of men, which is, something that you hear online and so on. Now, obviously, you and I are both in the top 5% of men, but I mean, at some level, we're also just kind of normal guys talking about this and explaining. We're both in stable relationships, I understand this sort of thing. You need to find out what the actual way to do the thing you want to do is. And in fact, it's as simple as just talking to people. And that's true very, very, very often. The way to stop urban crimes, to lock up criminals, the way to get people out of their vehicles is to pay for buses and so on down the line. So look for the rational, incremental solution, not the kind of complex, nonsensical one that's trendy. That's my piece of advice.
I love it. All right, let me roll these credits. I'll be right back. Bye, everybody.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to.